بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين حمدا كثيرا طيبا مباركا فيه كما يحب ربنا ويرضاه وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. So inshallah, in this hour or so, we're going to be going through a very important topic related to atheism. And what is the Islamic response to it? What is as Muslims, what is our response to atheistic thought? And so atheism is very prevalent nowadays. And many Muslims are being influenced by atheistic ideas and thoughts. And so how do we respond to that? And how does a Muslim, number one, how does a Muslim instill certainty in his heart with regards to Allah and His existence? And number two, how do you respond to some of the, doubts concerning Allah's existence? And number three, how do you give da'wah to an atheist? How do we Muslims prove to an atheist that Allah exists? That is basically what we're going to be talking about today. Now we're going to start with a very important topic as part of the introduction. And that is the question of what did human beings begin with? Did human beings begin with belief in God or without belief in God? Right? So we start by saying that although atheism is nothing new and has always existed throughout, our human history, as we know, it was never a widespread phenomenon like it is today. In fact, what history shows us is that there were very, very rare cases of the total denial of a supreme divine being who created the world. And what this proves is that the natural position of human beings is belief in God, and not disbelief in His existence, as atheists want you to believe. Right? That's why it's important to start by talking about this. And when we look at the Quran, what do we find? We find that throughout the Quran, Allah has narrated to us stories of the nations and the civilizations of the past. Right? And in not a single one of those stories do you have that atheism was widespread among them. The total denial of the existence of God. But what do you have with regards to all of those nations and civilizations? What do you find the common belief among them? It was not that God does not exist, but rather what was it? That God does exist, but exactly. In all of these stories of the nations of the past, the civilizations that were destroyed, Ad, Thamud, right? You find Allah addressing the issue of shirk. associating partners with Allah. So the problem that the people were facing is not denial of the Creator, believing in God, believing in the Creator, but associating partners with Him. Associating partners with Him. So the deviation of most of mankind in the past was shirk, associating partners with God, and not the denial of the existence of the Creator. And so they had this distorted belief about this Creator, thinking that the only way that we can reach Him, the only way for us to worship Him, is by going through partners, mediators, whether idols and statues or otherwise. And so all the civilizations and the nations of the past, they held the common belief in the existence of a supreme being, a God, who is the Creator. Even the people who our Prophet ﷺ was sent to, right, his own people, they used to associate partners with Allah, right? But they believed in Allah. They believed in God, right? And you find this throughout the Quran. Allah says, for example, وَلَئِن سَأَلْتَهُم مَّنْ خَلَقَ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضَ وَسَخَّرَ الشَّمْسَ وَالْقَمَرَ لَيَقُولُنَّ اللَّهِ. If you, O Muhammad, was to ask them, if you were to ask your people, who created the heavens and the earth and who, caused the moon and the sun to move, they will say Allah, right? They don't say it's their idols who did all that. So they do believe that the Creator is Allah. And that's why Allah sent the prophets and the messengers to their people to prove to them what? That Allah alone deserves to be worshipped. Not to prove to them that God exists. Right? In one instance in the Quran, the messengers are responding to their people who are doubting what? Who are doubting that we should worship God alone. Right? So the response of the messengers was, أَفِي اللَّهِ شَكٍّ. Is there any doubt about God? About Allah? Right? Meaning that you all acknowledge that God exists. Right? So why not worship Him? Right? So it wasn't the existence of God that the messengers were sent to prove, but rather their mission was to call the people to the oneness of the Creator and that He alone deserves to be worshipped without any partners. Right? This was after they deviated from that belief. So that is why Allah sent the prophets and the messengers. Based on this, we can easily conclude that belief in the existence of a Creator who created this world is what? This is the natural position that human beings have always had since the beginning. And it is the denial of this fact that is the unnatural belief, right? That people have adopted over time, whether it be in the past or the present, right? And these reasons for why people say that God does not exist have other reasons other than evidence, right? And we're going to come to that. We're going to talk about that. So what we have just discussed right now is very, very important before we get into discussion on does God exist or not. Why? Who can tell me why? why is it important for us to settle this question before we get into discussion for the proofs that God exists and so on? Mhm. Yes, exactly. When they claim that belief in God is not the default position, and that people over time, they started to adopt this idea that there is a creator, there is a God who we should devote ourselves to, etc., then the claim that God exists is on them, right? It's on the people who basically adopted this view that God exists, right? But when we say that the default natural position of human beings has always been that God existed, then that means somewhere over time, people started to claim that He doesn't exist. So it is the one who makes the claim that the onus of the proof is on him, right? The onus of the proof is on the one who's making the claim, right? And this is very important to understand, because nowadays the atheists, the way they start the whole debate and the discussion is by proposing that what we need to do is we need to doubt that God exists, right? And then we need to work our way up to prove that He exists, right? But what we need to do as Muslims is we need to turn it, we need to turn the question on them, right? So it shouldn't be, does God exist and what evidence is there to support this belief? But rather, the question should be, what reasons and proofs do we have that God does not exist? Right? And so, when we look into the reasons for why many people reject or doubt the existence of God, we see that these reasons have very little to do with the evidence and more to do with other external factors that we'll discuss later. All right? Now, this brings us to a very important question, and that is, do we require evidence to prove God's existence? Do we require evidence to prove God's existence? To answer this question, we go back to how people looked at it historically. As we mentioned, historically, belief in the existence of a creator was a given, right? It wasn't something that required evidence to prove, because it was common knowledge that no one denied. Now, does that mean that we don't have any good proofs or, reasons for believing in God's existence? No, we're not saying that. In fact, we do have very, very strong, convincing proofs for the existence of God, and that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to go through the proofs of the existence of Allah, right? But the point that I'm trying to make here is that we don't require evidence for His existence. Why? Because His existence is self-evidently true. Right? What is a self-evident truth? Can someone give me an example of a self-evident truth? That the earth is round. That could be debated. Because once upon a time, people never believed that. Right? Mm-hmm. Okay, let's make it more simple, right? Yeah. As time passes, we age. Okay, these are self-evident truths, without a doubt, but make it more simple than that. Do you exist? The answer is yes. What's the proof for that? Do you need evidence to prove that you exist? No. Why? Because this is what we call a self-evident truth. Right? You don't need evidence to prove that you exist. Right? So, if that is the case, that God's existence is a self-evident truth that does not require any evidence, then why are we going to discuss the proofs proving his existence, or why do Muslims today have to deal with this topic? Because historically, when you look at the works of our scholars, when it came to, our creed, our Aqidah, they would never start with this topic. In fact, rarely would they discuss, okay, here are the proofs that God exists. Right? So why is it today that we have to, write books on this topic, give lectures on this topic, the proofs that God exists? If it is a self-evident truth that doesn't require any evidence. Why? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because of hyper-skepticism. Basically, because there exists opposition to this obvious fact. Meaning that if atheists or doubters never existed or weren't vocal in denying the existence of God, there would be no need for us to have this discussion. Right? But because you have people who are denying it, that is why we need to now, provide evidence and arguments and proofs for, something which is a self-evident truth. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through 3 very basic proofs that God exists. And this is based on, our Islamic response, right? So, we Muslims have a different way of proving the existence of Allah than, let's say, Christians or others, right? And that's the whole point of having this this particular lecture. What is our Islamic response to atheism? Now the question here, as we're going to start by talking about the first proof, why is belief in God something so obvious and a self-evident truth? Because of what is known as the fitrah. Okay, so that is our first proof. What is the fitrah? The fitrah is an Arabic word that basically means the natural state, the innate nature, the innate disposition of human beings. So this innate nature acknowledges Allah. And it is this fitrah, this innate nature, that makes you want to worship Allah. Now, what proves that, the fitrah exists within every one of us is that when we are exposed to danger and we're on the brink of disaster, this fitrah, it comes out and it's awakened, making us turn to Allah and ask Allah for help. If there was an airplane and it was about to crash, people who believe in God, naturally, they'll raise their hands up to Allah and call upon Allah to help them, right? If there was an atheist on board, naturally, he's going to do the same. Now, he's not going to do that because the people around him are doing it, but naturally, there's something within us that recognizes that there is, someone higher out there, right? Because deep down inside, there's something telling us that there does exist a power beyond this world who can save me, right? And that is the power of Allah. And that's why Allah uses this very example to refute the mushrikun, and those who used to associate partners with Allah. Right? Allah says in the Quran that when they are at sea and then they are hit by the waves and they think they're about to drown, suddenly they call out to Allah. They ask Allah for help. And then when Allah saves them and they go back to shore and they go back to their lives, they start to associate partners with Allah once again. Right? Allah asks them, why do you do this? Right? You recognize that Allah alone can help you. And then you call upon others. Why do you do this? Right? Now, there are also new studies that are proving that we human beings have something called fitrah. And, this is something that non-Muslims are researching, right? There was a book called Born Believers. Born Believers, The Science of Children's Religious Belief. And the author, he looked at the behavior and the claims of children, and he concluded that children believed in what he calls natural religion, right? This idea that there exists a supreme being, right? A creator. And obviously, that creator cannot be a human being, right? So the question here comes, the question that arises here is that if recognition of God is the innate nature of humans, if it is built in, then why do we have people who deny this fact? If the fitrah is real, if every single human being has this fitrah within him that God exists, right? Then why do you have people today who are saying God does not exist? Are they going against something they know?
Because you have the fitrah essentially, which is pure in nature.
Mm-hmm.
Because of external environments which corrupt it, right? Because of that, the fitrah becomes tainted or it becomes improper to it.
Okay, yeah, exactly. So this fitrah that every single one of us is born with, what happens is as we grow, from birth as children, you have external influences that basically fog it, that basically veil the fitrah or spoil it, right? These influences could be parenting, or they could be society, or they could be peer pressure, or it could be what you learn at school, right? So these influences can cloud the fitrah and prevent it from acknowledging the truth. So it's not that they know that God exists, right? It's not that they know that God exists and they're going against what they believe in, right? But what happens is that the fitrah, at times it could become veiled and fogged. And the Prophet ﷺ spoke about this, right? He said, every single child is born in the state of fitrah, and then what happens? What did he say? It is the parents who make him a Christian or a Jew or a fire worshipper. Right? Parental influence. But if a child was to be left without anyone, influencing his thought process, then he's going to grow up recognizing that God exists. Because everything around us in this world point to the existence of a creator, as we're going to talk about next. All right. So that brings us to the next two proofs for the existence of God, both which are based on rationality or human intellect. And the reason why we move on to these other proofs is because some people, their fitrah becomes clouded. So now you need something else to prove to them that God exists. If you say to them, an atheist, you say to him, you have a fitrah, this innate natural position is that you believe in God. He says, I can't see it. Right? So now what do? You have to appeal to what? His intellect. Right? This aql, this intellect that Allah has given every single human being. However, it's important here to note that belief in Allah, right, it is not inferred from some kind of inductive or philosophical or scientific process. Right? Instead, this type of evidence acts as a trigger to wake up the fitrah. Right? That's the purpose of it. To wake up the fitrah of the person. And these proofs, these two proofs that we're going to mention, are also used by Allah in the Quran. Right? In the Quran, Allah uses basic logic, right? He appeals to our human logic and reasoning. He actually calls on us to use our rational minds that He has given to us to ponder over His signs, right? Clues, hints, or indications that prove His oneness. And that proves that He exists. So, the next proof that we have is the origin of existence. The origin of existence. Or the origin of creation. And this proof is the most common and widely used by many different religions and civilizations. And the reason for that is because of how simple of an argument it is, and how anyone can relate to it, and how anyone can understand it, regardless of their level of intellect. Right? You don't need to be a genius in order to understand this proof. Right? So this argument states that the existence of material things proves that something or someone caused it to come into existence from nothing. Why? Because it is impossible for it to come into existence on its own or without a cause. Without a cause. To show you how simple of an argument this is, a Bedouin was once asked, how do you recognize your Lord? So, in the old days, Bedouins were used as examples of people who are uneducated, illiterate, right? So look at his answer. This Bedouin, he was asked, how do you recognize your Lord? He answered by saying, he looks around himself. He's going to answer based on what's around him. He says, the droppings of a camel. Or he says, droppings tell me that a camel was here. Footprints tell me that a traveler came by. Right? Then he said, the sky, the earth, the mountains, the seas, do they not tell me that there is a creator, an all-hearer, and all-seer? Right? Look at how he used this proof. This same proof here. A simple Bedouin who hasn't studied anything, who has no formal education, proves to you that God exists. Right? There's a famous story of Imam Abu Hanifa. Right? He used a similar argument. He was supposed to have a debate with some atheists. Right? And he basically got late. Right? He got late for the debate. So when he finally got there, they asked him, why are you late? And the people who he's supposed to be debating, they asked him, what made you late? He said, what happened was, I was looking for a boat to cross the river. And there was no boat. Then all of a sudden, you had different pieces of wood that came together, and you had, the nails were put in, and, all of a sudden, there was a boat for me to ride in, and I came on that boat. They said, what are you talking about? Are you crazy? That is impossible. So what was his response? He said, well, this world that we live in, the heavens, the earth, and everything in us, did they all just come together like that by chance? And that is how the debate ended. He didn't have to have a debate with them, the debate ended. Right? He proved that God exists and that, their claim was false. Now, if you want to formulate this argument, this proof, you would do it in the following way. Every material thing exists prior to being non-existent. Is that true? Or do we have to argue this point? Every material thing that exists, prior to existing, it was non-existent, right? That is everything in this world. Everything in this world has a beginning, right? Now, it's very, very important for us to add material thing, and I'll talk about that later. As to why didn't I just say everything, right? Why didn't I just say everything that exists, prior to existing, it was non-existent. So that's number one. No one will deny this. Okay? If you're debating with an atheist, you start with this. He'll say, yes, I agree. You go on to point number two. Every material thing in existence proves the existence of a cause that brought it into existence from nothing. There had to be a cause. There had to be a cause to bring it into existence. Now, you know where we're going with this, right? The universe did not just appear out of nowhere like that. There had to be a cause, there had to be a creator. But now the atheist will say, what will he say? The Big Bang, right? The Big Bang is what caused this universe to exist. So our counter question is, and what caused that to happen? Let's say, for argument's sake, that the theory is true and there was a Big Bang. Okay, and what caused it? He won't have an answer for that. Right? He won't have an answer for that. So we say, let's say for argument's sake it's true. Who caused it? The Creator. Right? And finally, the conclusion, therefore, an eternal, all-powerful Creator brought everything into existence from nothing. Right? This all-powerful Creator has to be eternal, without a beginning. Right? Because if the Creator has a beginning, then they'll ask you, the atheist will ask you, who created the Creator? So that's why we say the Creator has to be eternal, without a beginning. Alright? So once we've concluded that this universe, this world was created by an uncreated Creator, it naturally leads us to believe in a designer and a Creator who possesses certain attributes that are unique to Him alone. Some of these attributes are omnipotence. What does that mean? What is omnipotence? The all-powerful, right? He has to have, unlimited power. Why? Because otherwise he wouldn't be able to create this world, right? Also, that he is absolutely self-sufficient, right? If he existed eternally from the beginning and there's nothing else, then he exists on his own, without relying on anything, right? Without, depending on anyone or anything for his existence. So he is the self-sufficient, right?
Didn't they say to that there's multiple eternal beings? That or if you could say that there's one, how is there not that?
Mm-hmm.
Then how there's no self-sufficiency anymore?
So Allah answers this question in the Quran, that if there was more than one God, they would rival against each other. They would fight against each other. Right? There has to only be one. Right? And so everything goes back to one. Everything goes back to one. Alright. So that now brings us to the next proof. Alright? The next proof is also a rational proof. And this is the argument of precise and perfect design. Alright? Now the previous argument looked at the creation from the perspective of its beginning, its origin. Because nothing exists except that it had a beginning. Right? Now we look at an argument that also looks at the creation around us as proof, but from another perspective. And that is the design of the creation as it exists in front of us. Right? So here we're not looking at the origin, we're looking at the creation as it exists in front of us. So this argument states, the signs of very accurate and precise design in all things in this universe, both living and non-living, proves that something or someone designed them in this precise, systematic way, because it is impossible for anything to exist in such a precise way by mere chance. By mere chance. And so if you want to formulate this argument, just like we did with the other one, then you would do it in the following way. Number one, you say, there exists a very accurate and precise design in creation. showing very careful consideration for every minor detail. Can we agree on this premise? Even an atheist will admit, yes. Scientifically, based on our scientific advancement as the human race, scientifically we have seen things, like marvelous things in this world, right, that show a very accurate and perfect design, right? With very precise calculations, right? Like, let's take the example of Earth and its proximity to the sun. If the Earth was just slightly away from the sun, just slightly, we wouldn't be able to survive. It would be too cold to survive. If it was just slightly closer to the sun, it would be too hot to survive. Right? I mean, there are places on Earth where it becomes very hot, like very extremely hot. Imagine if the Earth was just slightly closer to the sun. Those people would die. Likewise, there are places on Earth that are very cold. If the Earth was just slightly away from the sun, those people would die, right? All right, therefore, the existence of this fine precision proves the existence of a causer who is characterized with attributes of omnipotence, knowledge, and wisdom. Right? This design, this perfect design, with these precise calculations, could not have happened by mere chance. Right? Someone must have been behind it. Right? Therefore, an eternal, all-powerful, all-knowledgeable, and all-wise Creator designed everything in the manner that we see it. And you have many verses in the Quran that call on us to observe the perfect design of the creation around us. Right? These ayat echo the discoveries in physics and biology, which show that the universe, as well as human life, has laws that seem precisely set in order for human life to be sustainable. An order that facilitates our human existence. Right? And this precision is something that scientists today are referring to with a name. What do they call it? They call this something. What's that? No. Yes. The fine-tuning of the universe. The fine-tuning of the universe. Meaning that the universe has been fine-tuned in such a remarkable way that without the laws of physics and biology as they are, and without the laws that govern complex, conscious life as human beings, without these laws in physics and biology, we wouldn't be able to exist. Right? And so just think about this world that we live in. Right? Think about the Earth, how it is one planet in the solar system, and how the solar system is one of the many systems of what? The Milky Way galaxy. The Milky Way galaxy is one of millions of galaxies in the universe. Now imagine how they are all in order and they are not colliding with each other. They're all moving in perfect order. And that's what Allah mentions in the Quran about the sun and the moon. Right? that the sun and the moon are moving in perfect order. وَالشَّمْسُ وَالْقَمَرُ بِحُسْبَانٍ. The sun and the moon are moving in a very perfect calculation and order. Now let's come to earth. Think about the oceans. Think about the fish, the insects, the animals, the birds, the bacteria, the chemical elements that have not even been discovered until today. Yet each one of these beings and each one of these creatures has a law that they follow with total synchronization and balance and harmony. Now think about yourself. Allah calls on us. Allah calls on us to reflect. وَفِي أَنفُسِكُمْ أَفَلَا تُبْصِرُونَ. And within yourselves there are signs. Will you then not see? Right? Think about your human body with its massive, intricate control systems. Right? We have many systems in our bodies. What systems do we have in our bodies? Nervous system, digestive system, cardiovascular system, right? Look at all of these different, the skeletal system. You have all of these systems. Think about it for a second. Think about your brain, right? How it works, how it functions, how it analyzes, how it stores information, retrieves information. And then it distinguishes that information and categorizes it. How quickly? They say in a millionth of a second. Think about your heart and how it pumps continuously at a steady rate for your entire life. Intaking and discharging blood throughout your body and maintaining this steady precision throughout your life. So when you see the signs in this universe, whether it be in the cosmos, or whether it be here on earth, or whether it be our own human body, that something this powerful and precise could not just have happened by chance. So the question is, okay, you have people who are disfigured, right? Or with disabilities. That is not what we're talking about here, right? That is not what we're talking about. That's number one. Number two, how many of those are there compared to those who don't have those disabilities, etc. Right? So we're talking about, the general idea.
For point number two, the origin of existence, I know it's supposed to be right here. How would you respond to somebody who brings up evolution being the sole
Mm-hmm. So that's a good question. We say here that evolution, what do they call it? What do scientists call it? It is the theory of evolution, right? And there's a difference between a scientific theory and a scientific fact, right? So if they want to bring up evolution, we say that it's not a scientific fact, right? That's one way of responding, right? By saying that it's still a theory. And, it's not a fact. All right? The second way of responding to that is by saying that, okay, fine. Let's say, for argument's sake, we say that theory of evolution is true. All right? Going back to the origin, right? What started it all? There has to be a point where it began. Right? There has to be a point where it began. And this is something they don't have an answer to. They don't have an answer to that. Right? So basically, we human beings and the animals and all living beings, we go back to one origin, according to them. Right? Okay, where did that origin come from? Right? So that's responding to the argument of the proof number 2. As for proof number 3, right? Evolution cannot do this. Evolution cannot create the kind of design, the perfect design that we have in this world. Right? How can all of this happen by chance? How can we human beings, with the consciousness that we have, with the feelings that we have, with the aql, the intellect that we have that animals don't have, how did that happen by chance? Right? It's foolish to believe that all of this is by chance. All right. So this is the third proof. Now we're just going to conclude, and then we'll take your questions, inshallah. A question arises, and that is, what about scientific evidence? Because when atheists want evidence, when they ask you for evidence that God exists, they're generally looking for scientific proof. Right? They say, we have advanced so much scientifically, and we have, discovered the universe, and there is no presence of God. We have not found God. Right? And so a lot of people, they look at evidence and what constitutes evidence based on what? Based on what they're taught in school. That evidence is, through observation. It's what you can see, hear, touch, or smell. Hard material evidence. That's what we're taught, right? And that is basically scientific evidence, right? The problem is when you believe that the only way to arrive at the truth or the reality of anything is only through the scientific method. Basically, the problem is when you believe that there is only one kind of evidence, and that is scientific evidence. Right? Those who say that the only way of arriving at the truth of anything is through the scientific method, they are actually believers in what is known as what? Scientism. Right? Scientism is a philosophy that says that the only way of arriving at the truth of anything is through the scientific method. Right? Which naturally means that these people are not going to believe in God. And they're not going to believe in what we call al-ghayb, the unseen, right? What they refer to as metaphysical, right? It's reached to the point where, some of these atheists who believe in scientism, they're trying to prove things like consciousness and the ruh, the soul. These things can't be proven through scientific means. They can't be proven through scientific means, right? But can they deny that we have a soul or that we have consciousness? No. Right? But how do you explain, the soul? You can't explain it. So they're trying to find ways to prove scientifically that the soul exists. Basically, they want to replace religion with science. Right? So how can we prove that realities and truths can be proven through other than the scientific method? How can we prove that there are other evidences, other methods of proving things? Yes.
Was it a question?
Yes, it's a question.
I mean, I guess one thing is a lot of people that maybe don't ascribe to religion yet, they nevertheless have this sense of morality. But morality is a divine concept. You can't believe in morality, in my opinion. You can't believe in morality without basing it in some kind of divinity. So my point with that is they didn't necessarily come to those morals through scientific deduction, but they just inherently know them. So that's just an example where you can just know things personally or subjectively. But
Yeah, so that's an example of something that can be proven through other than the scientific method, right? Morality. Where do morals come from? How do we know that telling the truth is a good moral value and that lying is an evil moral value? Why have they accepted that? Right? It can't be proven through science, but they accept it, right? Yes.
I'm just wondering though, couldn't, and maybe this is an agnostic view, couldn't they believe in things like morality? Maybe they do believe in that something higher, it's something a bit divine, but they don't necessarily believe in a creator that created those. In the sense that maybe they do agree that there's like a natural law, but there doesn't necessarily have to be a creator that created those.
Yes, that's what they say. They say that it's whatever we humans have.
No, I don't mean that. I mean, not subjective. I just mean some maybe do believe in there are these objective divine laws, but they don't necessarily, it didn't necessarily come from a God that created it. Maybe it was just ever existed.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, so something that has always has been in existence since the beginning. But you'll find that atheists, they don't really have a moral standard that they follow. Right? And you could see this historically. Whenever a government came into power that did not believe in religion or God, what did we end up having? Marxism, right? The French Revolution, it was bloodshed, right? It was chaotic because they don't have a standard that we should all follow, right, in terms of moral values, etc. Anyways, coming back to this point, basically even Western scientists and philosophers agree that science is limited to what? Science is limited to the observable material world around us. And that other realities rely on other sources of knowledge other than science. Okay? For example, history. History relies on what? Does history rely on, the scientific method? No. It relies on narration. Right? History relies on narration. Reports, not hard material evidence. For example, did a person exist in history called Alexander the Great? they unanimously agree that yes. Historians don't ask, let's prove it, let's find his grave, let's find his body to prove that he existed, that this was a person in history. Right? Even events that took place in the past. Do they say we need, we need hard material evidence to prove that certain events took place in history? Especially before documentation. Right? They rely on what? They rely on the oral tradition. Orally, it was passed on that this event took place in history. So yes, certain things can be proven through other than science, and things can be proven through science. Right? But here we need to distinguish what can be proven through the scientific method and what can be proven through other than that. So we say that whatever we know about Allah or the unseen, it has nothing to do with the scientific method. Right? The scientific method is for the observable world that we live in, and Allah is not part of that world. Allah exists on His own, beyond this material world that we live in. Right? Alright. Now, to respond to atheists on this question, right, we say that just because we cannot prove something, unobservable, that it exists, does that mean it doesn't exist? Logically. If we can't prove through the scientific method that something exists, does that mean it does not exist? You.
It doesn't mean that because we have a number which says that the absence of evidence.
Yes.
For so just because we can't necessarily prove using the method, of course, and study it, that doesn't mean that of course such things don't exist.
Yes, exactly. The absence of evidence does not prove the absence of something does not prove the absence of evidence. Right? The only thing it proves is that we cannot arrive at the conclusion that it is true through the scientific method. Right? But that doesn't mean we can't prove it through other methods. Right? Logic is one way of arriving at truths. Right? Logic. Right? Logic is different than the scientific method. And we used logic right now to prove Allah's existence. Therefore, there has to be some other method, right, to prove the existence of the Creator, and to also tell us what exists beyond this material world that we live in. Right? And that's where the role of revelation comes in. Right? So that brings us to the next point. The role of revelation, of the wahi. Right? If we agree that God exists, the Creator, then surely that Creator must have informed us about who He is and what He expects from us. Right? Because it's not logically acceptable that God would leave us in this world, He would create us and then just leave us to wander in confusion about who He is and what He expects from us. Right? Now, we move on to this point here once the atheist is convinced that God exists. Right? And we use this with who as well? With? No. This point of that we're on right now, the role of revelation, who can we use it with? Christians? No. Muslims? No. So I said atheist, yeah. Agnostic? You're getting close. Yes, deists. Right? What is a deist? A deist is someone who says there is a deity, a God. An atheist says there is no God. He says that with absolute certainty. He says there is no God. An agnostic says there may be a God, there may not be a God. Right? So let's say we've convinced the atheist and the agnostic, let's say we've convinced them that God exists. Okay? Now they are what you call a deist. Right? But now the deist, he will say that God exists, but he has not really sent us a message. He hasn't really sent us a religion. He just created us to be, and that's it. There is no afterlife, There is none of that. There's no accountability. We're just here to live and die, and that's it. Right? So this is what we call a deist. So we say to a deist that, look, if you believe God created us, right? And you believe about this God that He is the all-powerful, the most knowledgeable, and the most wise, then wisdom dictates that He created us for a purpose. Right? When you do something, do you just do it like that without any reason? No. Like we human beings, when we manufacture things, we design things. We have a car. We have, a phone. You have a laptop. Each one of these things were made by us for a purpose. We don't just create things just like that without purpose. So how could you believe that about the Creator? That He just created us like that without any purpose. Right? And if He did not tell us our purpose, then that means He is unjust. Right? If He expects us to live a certain way, then He has to tell us that. Right? Otherwise He'd be considered unjust. Right? Alright. So, once we understand this, we understand that Allah has indeed communicated with us and told us, about Himself and what He wants from us. And the only way that is possible is through what we call revelation and prophethood. Revelation and prophethood. So God chooses, a human being to send His message to. Now it's up to us to see who out there is claiming to be a prophet and, basically research and look into his proofs for his claim of being a prophet. And once we're convinced that he is indeed a prophet, then we should follow him. Right? And so Islam teaches us that Allah created us for a purpose. What is that purpose? To serve Him, to worship Him. That, in a nutshell, is the purpose of life. Right? The purpose behind our creation was to recognize the Creator, to worship Him, to surrender ourselves to Him, to obey the laws that He has determined for us. That is our purpose in life. Right? From Allah we all came. This Creator created us. We all came from Him and we're all going back to Him. So those who fulfill the purpose behind why they were created, then they should expect a reward. Those who fail to fulfill the purpose behind their existence, they should be expected to be punished. Right? So the question is not merely going back to the Creator, but the question is, how are we going to go back to the Creator? Right? Is it going to be, in a state where He is angry with us and therefore He's going to punish us? Or is it going to be in a state in which He is pleased with what we have done and therefore He's going to reward us? All right. One last point that I wanted to mention now, and that is, after all this, why are some people still in denial? After this long discussion proving that God exists, proving that He created us for a reason, a purpose, to live in this world. The question now is, why are some people still in denial? What I mean by this is an atheist, right? Or an agnostic as well. Or someone who is doubting the existence of God. Now, for someone who is sincere in searching for the truth, he really, really has questions, and genuinely he wants to know. Does God exist? Why am I here? What happens after death? These are genuine questions coming from a sincere heart. I want to know the truth, right? For such people, they will be guided to the truth, right? Allah will guide them because their hearts are sincere. But the reality is that many atheists, or even Muslims who are doubting the existence of God, they are being driven by something else other than a lack of evidence. It's not that, we don't have proof that God exists. It's not that, the answers, I'm not convinced with the answers, right? But rather, it's something else. There are other factors that are pushing these people to, basically that position of being an atheist. And it is no secret that many of the leading atheists in the Western world for the last 200 years, I'm talking about the big atheists, like the leading atheists. Today you have people like Richard Dawkins. In the past you had others. Many of these people, what led them to atheism was a personal tragedy in their lives when they were younger. Something happened to them in their lives. Maybe they had an accident, they lost their parents, a tragic event in their lives. And so it was as if they wanted to rebel against God for what He made them go through. And so they said, forget about this, God does not exist. Right? So now they have a position that they have adopted, and now they're going to try to figure out, how can I prove that God does not exist? Right? So some people are driven to atheism because of what we call human suffering, what they call the problem of evil. Right? If God exists and He is the all-kind, the most merciful, the most compassionate, and everything is in His hands, and He is the all-powerful, then why am I going through this? Right? Why is He making me suffer? Others are led to atheism to free themselves from what they perceive to be the restrictions of religion. So they see that religion restricts my freedom, especially Islam. Right? Other religions, and that proves that they are false religions, They have evolved over time, and they are very loose on what you can do and what you can't do, right? But not with Islam, right? Because Islam is a religion for all times and all places. It will never change. So today, they find that Islam is not compatible with Western lifestyle. The liberal Western lifestyle is that of freedom, liberating yourself. And I want to live a free life. I don't want to have these restrictions. I want to drink, I want to party, I want to commit zina. And, Islam is restricting me. So again, they've already made up their minds that this is how I want to live my life. And instead of living with the guilt and the shame of being called a sinner, right? Instead of living with that guilt of me sinning, they say, let me just leave it altogether, right? I don't believe God exists. Okay, now I could live however I want. I don't have to live with that guilt. So you see how it's something else. And a third group, they are basically, what leads them to doubt Allah's existence is the many lies and accusations made up by the critics of Islam. So they fall for the traps of the enemies of Islam. When they say, for example, Islam oppresses women, or Islam is a barbaric, backward religion, or Islam is not a religion that is compatible with the 21st century, and so on. Right? So we Muslims, we hear these things, and then we start to get influenced by these claims. That causes us to leave Islam. Now, if you leave Islam, what's the alternative? The other religions they don't really have anything to offer. So you say, okay, I'll just live without following any religion. I don't believe in God. Right? So as you can see, the vast majority of so-called atheists don't actually believe deep down inside that God, or they do believe deep down inside that God exists. Right? They do believe deep down inside that God does exist. Right? Because the proofs that He exists are just too convincing. Right? But rather there are other reasons, other motives that are making them to live in denial. Just like the kuffar of the past. Right? Just like the disbelievers of the past. It was their arrogance and their egos that prevented them from submitting to the truth when their prophets brought it with crystal clear signs and proofs. Our Prophet ﷺ, when he came, there were people who disbelieved in him, right? They even fought against him. Now, these same people, deep down inside, what did they believe? Deep down inside, they knew that he is a messenger sent by Allah. Because they saw too many signs. They saw too many signs that were convincing that he is the prophet, the messenger of Allah. Okay, so what is it that's preventing you from following him? What is preventing you from believing? Other factors. Not evidence. Right? This is something very important for us to understand. When an atheist comes to you and asks for evidence, understand that 99% of the time, it's not about evidence. Now, this is not to say that, every atheist is like that. As I said, there is that 1% or 5% where genuinely they believe that, I require evidence, right? They're genuinely looking for the truth. The vast majority of them, they've made up their mind that God does not exist for other reasons, right? For other reasons. As Allah says about Fir'aun and his people, وَجَحَدُوا بِهَا وَاسْتَيْقَنَتْهَا أَنفُسُهُمْ ظُلْمًا وَعُلُوًّا. They denied it outwardly, right? Allah is talking about Fir'aun. He denied it outwardly that Musa alayhi salam is a prophet of Allah, but deep down inside, they were certain that he is a prophet of Allah. Right? Why? Out of, as Allah says, out of dhulm and ulu, wanting to be above. Right? Fir'aun was afraid that his power would be stripped from him. He wanted to hold on to his power. And so these people, they claim they don't worship God, they don't believe in God, but what does Allah tell us? That they do worship something. They have taken a God. What is that? Their hawa, right? أَفَرَأَيْتَ مَنِ اتَّخَذَ إِلَهَهُ هَوَاهُ. Have you not seen the one who has taken his whims and desires as his deity, his God that he worships? So unfortunately, these people, they don't realize that true freedom is freedom from being controlled by our whims and desires. And that is the worst kind of slavery. The worst kind of slavery is becoming a slave to your whims and desires. Right? So anyways, this is where we'll stop, inshallah. Any questions? Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's a good question. The question was, we said earlier that, if God does not tell us about himself and why he created us, then that means he is unjust. Right? So, do we have to prove that he is just? Right? We have a golden rule, and that is that in order for God to be God, he has to possess what? Attributes of perfection. Right? Logically, God cannot be God unless he is perfect from every way and angle and perspective. Right? And that's why certain attributes of Allah are proven logically. Right? You don't need, Allah to tell us that he is the all-powerful. Look at the creation around you. That proves that he is the all-powerful. You don't need Allah to tell us that he is the most knowledgeable. Look at the creation around you and you see how knowledgeable Allah is. The same thing with being the all-wise, al-Hakim. And the same thing with being the most just. So being unjust is an attribute of imperfection. Being unjust is an attribute of imperfection. Any other questions?
For the objection that you made for evolution, some atheistic revolutionists say that a theory in science, though it's called a theory in quotation marks, it's essentially almost absolute fact, essentially where it explains certain laws that we have in the universe. So how would we correctly respond to this objection that you raised?
So, all right, so we can follow up. The question was about evolution, that I mentioned that it is a theory in the end of the day, and not a scientific fact. But in science, they say that such theories are almost like fact, right? So we disagree with that, number one. Number two, let's say that that is the case. It's still basically the origin of creation, right, goes back to al-ghaib, right? And what did we say about the unseen? It cannot be proven through the scientific method. Right? Were we there when the so-called evolution process began? We were not there. And Allah mentions this in the Quran. Allah says in the Quran. Where does Allah say that? In the surah that we all read today, Surah Al-Kahf. What does Allah say? مَا أَشْهَدْتُهُمْ خَلْقَ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَلَا خَلْقَ أَنفُسِهِمْ. Allah says, I did not make them to witness the creation of the heavens and the earth, nor their own creation. Meaning, our father Adam. We weren't there. Right? Allah did not allow us to witness the origin of creation. Right? So that's one way of refuting the theory of evolution. Now, another point to add here, some Muslim scholars have said this, that when it comes to evolution, we cannot accept the theory of evolution with respect to human beings. Why? Because we have clear-cut text in the Quran that prove that we were not created through the process of evolution. We human beings. How did Allah create us? Adam, right? Our father Adam. There was no process of evolution, right? In fact, what did Allah say to Iblis when he refused to prostrate to Adam? مَا مَنَعَكَ أَن تَسْجُدَ لِمَا خَلَقْتُ بِيَدَيَّ. What prevents you from prostrating to what I created with my two hands? Allah created our father Adam directly with his two hands. And we are his descendants. Now, some Muslim scholars today say, so that is, we cannot accept the theory of evolution when it comes to humans, but there is the possibility that other living beings could have been created through a process of evolution. Why? Because Allah did not tell us how He created the other beings. Allah did not tell us how He created the animals or the birds or the insects. So it's possible, right? But here we have to be careful. We cannot say with certainty that it was through the process of evolution. Right? Why? Because of what I just mentioned earlier. Allah did not, He didn't make us witness that, how He created it. We can say the possibility is there. Right? And Allah knows best. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, fine. Let's say, for argument's sake, that Allah tells us that the cattle were created with Allah's hands. Okay, how about other species? Right? I'm just saying that some scholars have said that, the possibility exists. Right? The possibility of evolution with regards to other species exists. But it remains a possibility. For us Muslims, we cannot say with certainty that Allah did create, certain species through the evolution process. Because number one, He did not tell us that. And number two, He did not make us witness that. And so we say Allah knows best. Any other questions? By the way, I just wanted to mention, the brothers perhaps gave me this topic because this was my master's thesis. It was on a movement called the New Atheist Movement that emerged after 9/11. I'm not sure if any of you were born in 2001, but the world changed after 2001, after September 11th, and you had this, this war against Islam and the Muslims. Islamophobia started to rise, and some of the leading atheists in the world at that time, they took advantage of this hate for religion and Islam in particular, and they jumped on this to spread, atheism, right? And it was a very, very militant kind of atheism, where before atheists were just like, we don't believe in God. Here are our justifications for it, our proofs. But these people, right, they came out and said, we need to, militantly, we need to go against religion, right? We need to, and they were the ones who were, with the Bush administration, invading Muslim countries, right? We're talking about people like Stephen Hitchens, Sam Harris, right? Richard Dawkins is also part of what we call the New Atheists, right? And so I had done my research on this movement, right, called the New Atheist Movement. And much of what we have discussed was taken from that research. Now, I remember one of my professors saying, it's pointless for you to research this topic because atheism is something that, it has its ups and downs in history. So there are times when they come to a peak and they're very loud and vocal, and then they disappear. And that's exactly what has happened with this New Atheist Movement. I'm sure none of you have heard of this movement, but it was big when, 15 years ago, it was huge. Their books became the bestsellers, right? If you go to the books that they wrote during that period of time, 2002 to 2007, let's say. Richard Dawkins, he had authored a book. Sam Harris had authored a book. These books became, bestsellers. And they were even translated into different languages, including Arabic. They were even targeting the Arab world and Muslim countries, right? So that's why I took on that topic. But as you can see, what my professor had said was true. You don't hear of these guys anymore. It's a dead movement now. The New Atheist Movement is a dead movement now. All right, any other questions? Mm-hmm. 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 Basically, we respond logically. We say that it is logically impossible for something like a process for that to be infinite, right? They call this infinite regress of events. Infinite regress of events. That is logically impossible for there to be an infinite number of events going into the infinite past. What do I mean by this? What do I mean by this? the atheist will ask you, if everything has a cause and a creator, then who created the creator? Now, if you say, okay, the creator has a creator, then the question will be, and who created that creator? The next question will be, and who created that creator? And so now you're going into an infinite regress into the past. Why is this logically impossible? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Exactly. If that was true hypothetically, that is possible, an infinite regress of events, then we wouldn't exist today. Because that process is just, continuing.
But if our belief is that Allah is ever-existing,
Mm-hmm.
couldn't they just say, well, you believe Allah is ever-existing, but I believe that the universe is ever-existing. So what would the difference be?
But in our argument, what did we say? In our argument in the very beginning, we said all material things that exist were non-existent prior. Right? Every material thing, which includes this universe, it had a beginning. Right? So, this is something they agreed on. And then we moved on to the next point, right? So we need to prove to them that every material thing did not exist once upon a time. If we can prove that to them, then we move on to the next point, right? And we say that, how could, this universe be infinite? Right? Logically, it's not possible because everything has a beginning and everything has a cause. Right? It has to end somewhere. Right? How could the universe be infinite? It has to end somewhere. Right? And what did we say? That every material thing, remember I said we're going to come back to this point of why did I say every material thing and not everything? Why did I say that? Because that excludes Allah. If you say everything that exists has to have not existed before, then that would include Allah. Right? But Allah is not a material thing. Allah is not part of this created universe. So that law does not apply to him. Right? That law does not apply to him. All right, we'll stop here, and it's time for Salat al-Maghrib. I hope that whatever we learned was beneficial. I ask Allah to keep all of us firm on our iman and our belief and our yaqeen in Allah and in the deen of Islam. And I ask Allah to make us firm upon His deen until the day that we meet Him. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك وصلى اللهم وسلم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.